Okay. So I believe I'm recording now. Okay. So um, the goal here, I'm going to try something different. You know, I've done it in the past in the spring. I don't think I've ever um, talked with you folks before, but I've done the weekly social studies class before, and just go week by week and do different readings and different, you know, learn different things about history or civics and government. But what this class is going to do, my intention is to try something new. I'm going to do a 3 or 4 week, I haven't really quite decided, but a 3 or 4 week crash course, like everything that you need to know for the GED social studies test or the high set social studies test. They're pretty similar, those two. Then at the end of 3 or 4 weeks, you know, the distance learning project does sessions every 3 weeks and then a transition week. So every 4 weeks, every month. My goal is every month to teach the same stuff. So if you wanted to come back after 4 weeks, you're welcome to, but it's gonna be a repeat. That way, anybody new who signs up can jump in 3 or 4 weeks, hopefully, hear everything that they need to know to do well, or at least, you know, get that base knowledge to do well on the social studies GED or the high set. So have you guys done classes before? Is that a format that other teachers are doing? Like a
Uh,
3 or 4 weeks and then repeat?
Not really. It's more like several months, maybe.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I'm sort of the guinea pig, and you guys too. We're the guinea pigs here. Um, and I've had great success with students coming and then, you know, 4 weeks and months, as long as they're studying with the distance learning project, doing things. We'd learn different things, but then new people come in. You know, if I teach you for 4 weeks and then in the 5th week somebody new comes in, they've missed, you know, what we've talked about for the past 4 weeks. So it's kind of like, do I go back for that new person? Do I not? So for this new one, we're going to try something different. Maybe I'll do it a few times, a few months here. Maybe we'll decide that's not what's best for the students, or maybe it'll work. Oh, there's somebody new coming in. Okay, so what we're going to do? Let me give Jessica a second here to log in. All right. Well, what we're going to talk about today then is, as you see on the screen, early U.S. history and government. The government that we have today is here because of that early U.S. history. So they go hand in hand. It's a good it's a good way to study our government as it's built today, with the 3 branches and everything, because it was designed by those people we call the founding fathers. And they designed it for a reason. You know, in that historical time, when they woke up in the morning, they made those decisions for a reason. You know, and we're of course living in the world they've created with our government. So that's what we're gonna tackle today. Jessica, thanks for logging in. Can you hear me okay and see the screen okay?
Yes, I can.
Good. Okay. Well, what I was saying a moment ago as you logged in was I'm trying something new here. I've done the social studies classes before, and just taught them week to week, and every week we talk about something different. This month, this fall, I'm trying something new. I'm sort of the guinea pig of all the teachers. We had the idea, maybe I'm going to teach a 3 or 4 week, just a 1 month, a one session, you know, 3-week session for the distance learning project, just a 3 or 4 week crash course for social studies. So, and I haven't, I've kind of gathered my thoughts, but I haven't written it all. So I'm not sure if it's going to be 3 or 4 weeks, but at the end of 3 or 4 weeks, I will, you know, you and I will have covered everything. Well, not all the details, but the general things for the social studies GED or high set test.
Okay.
You know, maybe that's going to be great and students are going to love it, and maybe not, you know, but the theory is, or my thinking is, in that, you know, if you come back in the 5th week, you're going to be hearing week 1 again, you know.
Okay.
So that's why on the emails we're calling it the social studies crash course, because in 3 or 4 weeks we're going to cover a lot of ground, and it'll be basic. We're not going to dig terribly deep into these things, but we're going to cover a lot, get the basics, and then of course you can always dig a little deeper on your own if need be. Okay, so that's the plan. So today is part 1, early U.S. history and government. So let's jump in here. So there we go. Okay, so here's a timeline of the American colonies. Okay, we have the 13 original colonies you see at the bottom. What were they colonies of? What country, if you were living in Pennsylvania in those early days, 1600s, what country were you living in? Anybody know?
Um, Britain.
You were living in Britain. Okay, so they were British colonies. So here on the left-hand side, we have the timeline. 1607, you have Jamestown, Virginia. Okay, that's, and of course you, before that you have Christopher Columbus, you have got a bunch of Spanish and Portuguese, the conquistadors, in the 1400s, 1500s, but really European settlement, you know, these Europeans coming and settling and living permanently in North America starts kind of in 1607, Jamestown, Virginia. 1620, the British, the Pilgrims land in their boat, the Mayflower, in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And then in the bottom, you can see the list of the 13 colonies. The years are the days that the colonies were founded officially. So 1600s into, well, Pennsylvania is one of the last, really. 1681, they formed the colony of Pennsylvania. Georgia goes into 1732. So through the 1700s, or through the 1600s, you have the forming of the colonies. These are British colonies. The people that lived in them were British people, citizens, subjects, whatever. You have the French and Indian War, 1754, 1763. Dates aren't hugely important, right? But there's a few that that certainly are. We'll talk about them. But the middle of the 1700s, you have the French and Indian Wars, which is the British fighting the French and Indians. The Indians got on the side of the French and fought the British. At the end of that war, the British win. They beat the French and gain control of this eastern part of North America, the 13 colonies. Okay. Then you get into the late 1700s and you have a bunch of taxes from the British on the Americans. Anybody know what some of the taxes were? The British taxes. Like, what did they tax?
Sugar, tea, other outports.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
quite sure exactly what, but those are most of them.
Right, so things coming in generally, imports, but they put taxes on them. A tax on, yeah, the sugar tax, the tea tax, those are two big ones. They did a stamp act where they taxed basically anything that was made of paper needed the government's stamp on it. And of course, that stamp cost a little bit of money, and so it was the British collecting money from the American colonists. Okay, so you have, as you can imagine, increased tension. The Americans, they started to think of themselves as Americans, even though there was no country of America. They started to think of themselves as different than the British people, their British brothers, living over in England and living in London. So they start to form an identity, and they start to get upset that the British government in London is taxing them so heavily and treating them so poorly. They want to run their own lives. And so that bubbles over. You have the Boston Massacre, okay, which is this, oh, I put my line wrong there. The line down should be from the Boston Massacre. This is at the time engraving that showed up in the newspaper, because there was no pictures. This is the Boston Massacre. Okay, you have the Boston Tea Party, where to what's the word, protest the tea tax, they dressed up as Indians and threw a bunch of tea into Boston Harbor. Okay, so they're protesting. We're seeing protests this year for different things, and peaceful and not. But this year, as I'm sure you know, is not the first protests in American history. Some of the first protests, you could say, in American history were because they were so angry about the way the British were treating the American colonists. So then you have somebody says, well, we need to declare independence. So July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress, which was a group of these colonists, got together illegally and called themselves the Continental Congress, representatives from each colony. And they adopted and signed the Declaration of Independence. We're going to look at that in a little bit. Okay, 1776, they declared their independence from Britain. Well, of course, Britain said, no way, we're not going to allow that. And so they fought the Revolutionary War. So 1775 to 1783, you're fighting the Revolutionary War, a war in America, in the colonies. Some happened in Pennsylvania, a lot up in New York. A war against the British. We won the war, the Battle of, I think, Yorktown was the last one, and then they signed a treaty. Okay. 1777, they adopt the Articles of Confederation. Now, this is not something that a lot of people think about, but it is good to have tucked in the back of your mind. Anybody know what the Articles of Confederation were?
Honestly, I think this is the first time I've heard of that.
It's mine too.
Okay. The Articles of Confederation was when they won, they were fighting the Revolutionary War. Okay. They've declared their independence 1776. They said, we are our own country. Well, they thought that, the American colonists thought that, they felt that way, but of course Britain was actively fighting them for several more years, fighting a war to say, no, you're not, you are part of Britain. So it was a battle going on, a war. During that time, the American colonists said, hey, we are a country, we're going to view ourselves as a country, we're the United States of America, even though they're fighting a war to actually decide that. We need a government. So they wrote up a government. They thought the Continental Congress made the Articles of Confederation, which was their first government. Okay, they made a national government. It was it's not the most important thing because it didn't last long. It only lasted about 10 years before they realized, hey, this isn't quite right. We didn't do it right. There's some things we can improve on. The Articles of Confederation, it was a confederation of the states. Okay, the 13 colonies turned into 13 states. And basically, not the most important thing, but the Articles of Confederation gave the states a lot of power, and the national government was basically just the lead, just to keep all the states together. Okay, today we have a very, very, very powerful national government. Under that first try, the Articles of Confederation, the national government was not very powerful. The states had all the power. But then they ran into some things and they said, hey, you know what, this isn't really the right way to do it. So they redid it. They drew up a new plan, which is 1787, they passed the US Constitution, which is the government they agreed upon that lasts until today. We still have it. So the government we have today with a president and two houses of Congress and the Supreme Court, that's not our first government in the United States. The first government was the Articles of Confederation, but didn't work quite right, so they redid it. I think it's kind of interesting to think about. They said, hey, you know what, this isn't right. We're going to do this. We can improve upon this, and that's what they did. So that's the Articles of Confederation. It lasted about 10 years. Then they wrote the Constitution, and they said, okay, this is better. part of the Constitution was that the states needed to ratify the Constitution. The 13 states have to agree upon it, right? They said, we don't have a king anymore. We're doing it the right way. And we need these states to believe in what we're doing, to believe in this new government. We need everybody's support. So between 1787 and 1790, one by one, the 13 states ratified, agreed to the US Constitution. And then we're also going to look at the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. It happens very quickly, 1791. Okay, that's what we're going to look at. Who is this here in a red jacket?
A British soldier.
Yeah, British soldier. Their nickname were the Redcoats. Okay, that is, when you hear Redcoats or where you see this guy or down on the bottom in the engraving for the Boston Massacre, the Redcoats are the British. Okay, and that's at that time, the Revolutionary War. Okay, let's look at the Declaration of Independence. It was signed, actually, the funny story is I guess I wrote the wrong thing. It was signed on July 2nd, but then they didn't read it publicly until July 4th. So everybody remembers July 4th, but it was actually signed July 2nd, 1776. But the date we all know is July, well, and we celebrate every year, is July 4th, 1776. Okay, this is the beginning. This is the first paragraph of it. It is a long document. This is the beginning, and then it goes into a list. It's just a long list of their problems they had with the British king. The king is the government, the British government at that time. So the Declaration of Independence is really just them declaring their independence and listing all the problems they have at that time, the Americans have with Britain, the British king, and the British government. So could somebody want to take a turn and read this paragraph for us?
I'll read.
Okay.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed, is that right?
Endowed.
Endowed by their creator with certain unalienable,
That's okay.
unalienable
Yeah.
rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government.
Okay, thank you. So that is how it starts. This is their declaration to the world, and they mailed a copy. They sent a copy across the ocean to the British king and Parliament. And if you think about it, there are some big words, and I kept, and most of the time when people quote or copy the Declaration of Independence, they keep the capitalizations. They capitalize seemingly random words. But when you're typing it up, I think you're supposed to keep those there. But it's an interesting thought here. Okay, so think about this. Put yourself back there in the 1770s, 1776. The whole world up until this point, for the most part, is run by monarchies. The only government around, not the only, but the vast majority of governments are monarchies, run by a monarch, a king or a queen. A king or a queen can do whatever they want. And if you don't like it, you're going to have to overthrow them in a war. And people do all the times and declare the new king. Or, they believed in the divine right of kings, which it's, if you are king, it's because God wants you to be king. Okay. That's the almost only type of government that they know. But here they're declaring independence from the British king, And they are coming up, this is a time where a lot of these Americans and some Europeans, these philosophers are coming up with, okay, the ideas, they're saying, okay, what is the purpose of having a government? It's not so some king can get rich. So this paragraph is a description of what is a government? What's the purpose that people have governments in society? So they say we hold these truths to be self-evident. Okay, these things that we're about to say are self-evident. They're obvious. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is your right as a human. Okay. To secure the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, governments are instituted among men. That's the purpose of governments, is to protect our rights of life, liberty, and happiness. Anytime a form of government becomes destructive to those ends of protecting life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish and to institute new government. Okay, so people, and there's every once in a while, there's people all the time who think we need to overthrow our government because it is not, people make the argument, our government is no longer protecting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's what this Declaration of Independence does. And then after this, in the Declaration of Independence, it is a long list of dozens of complaints that they have, among which is the tea tax and the sugar tax and all different things. Okay, so it's a list of grievances that they have. That's the Declaration of Independence. So we hold these truths to be self-evident. That's the Declaration of Independence. It's good to be basic, have a recognizable awareness of a couple of these documents. Okay, so they declared independence, they fought the war, the Revolutionary War, the Americans won, the British surrendered, and they said, okay, you are British, Britain recognizes America as its own country now. So they write the US Constitution. This is the preamble, sort of the introductory paragraph to the US Constitution. The preamble, and this is the part everybody recognizes, we the people. It lays out, okay, this is you're about to read a long document that lays out a new description of a government that we're designing. They came up with a lot of these ideas from, on their own. They designed a new government. But this preamble paragraph says the purpose of it. Okay. So does somebody new want to read this paragraph?
I'll do that.
Okay.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and the prosperity to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
Okay.
Now I know that I know that because we have a kid DVD that talks about that and has songs about that and they have that in the song.
Yeah, the Schoolhouse Rock.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. My son just this week as a beginning of school, he's in 6th grade. The social studies teacher had them memorize the preamble. This right here.
Yes.
And I said, well, he was doing pretty good. I was quizzing him the one day, and he was stumbling over part of it. I said, well, you've heard the song, right? He said, no, what song? So I pulled up YouTube and I showed him the song, and he didn't like it. I said, well, no, it's not the greatest song in the world, but it's going to help you remember this. And yeah, sure enough, he watched it a few times and he said it is helpful. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And no, and I knew that. I did that myself, years ago. I listened to that song. I guess the teacher must have played it somewhere. And no, I can hear it in my head right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the best learning CD that's out. The
Yeah.
best learning DVD out.
Yeah, it is good stuff.
Yeah.
So here I put it in colors. Okay. a lot of times, you know, on the GED test, the high set test, they're going to give you paragraphs. They're going to give you these old documents. And the sentences are, sometimes the words are big, but what's big is the sentences. The sentences these people used were really long and pretty complex, but you need to hear the parts of the sentence. Okay, this is one big long sentence, but if you look at it here, I put it in colors, there's 3 parts. Okay, we the people of the United States, in order to do something, and then they list a bunch of things. In order to, you know, I could have put this as a bulleted list. Form a more perfect union, and think about this as they're starting a new country. These are their goals for their country. This is their goals for the government. This is what we want the government to be for. This is why we're doing this. To form a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Think post like after. Posterity is people who come after you. Okay, so in order to do all those things, we do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. So that's their introductory paragraph, the preamble of the US Constitution. That's listing all the goals of this government. In order to do these things, we are establishing this Constitution of the United States. Okay, so that's the preamble, we the people. So the Declaration of Independence is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and the preamble is, we the people of the United States. Okay, those are 2 pretty important social studies documents that you want to be a little familiar with. Okay, now let's look at, wait a second, where did I go with this one? Okay, we're going to jump, well, you know what, I'm going to jump around a little bit. No, I better not, because I'll forget. Okay, so the Constitution is their blueprint for the government. Okay, it has, well, let me skip here. Okay, in Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, it lists the 3 branches of government that we recognize today. Okay, still have it today. Article 1, article is just a part of this document. Article 1 describes the legislative branch. Article 2 is the executive branch. Article 3 is the judicial branch. And then I think there's Articles 4, 5, and 6, which don't describe branches of government, but just kind of bring up other topics. Okay, so the Constitution is a blueprint, very general, very broad blueprint for the government that they were building. And I think it's exciting to think about those men. They were, you know, sitting there, they were all men there, coming up with these ideas and saying, and they were debating. It took them weeks and months of debate. Okay, should we have 1 president? Some people thought we ought to elect 2 presidents to be co-presidents. Should we have, in the legislative branch that's going to pass laws, should we do just 1 group or should we do 2 groups? And they decided 2 groups. We have the House of Representatives and the Senate. They're debating what would be best, what would work, what would continue to work for years and years. You know, what's the best way to do it? They debated back and forth. Okay, not everybody always agreed. They did a lot of compromising, but they passed they agreed upon it. They wrote the Constitution. They signed off on the Constitution. Then each state needed, you know, the state legislatures, the state capitals needed to sign off and agree to the Constitution. Once the majority of them did, then it would take effect and they would have a new government. It ended up that they all did, all 13 original states ratified, agreed to it, and got on board. Okay. They immediately then, they said, well, through that debate, they came up with some ideas that, okay, these things aren't addressed in the Constitution, so we need to immediately pass some amendments. Okay, they amended the Constitution, they added to it, they fixed it. the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments. They did it as a bunch, just a big bundle of 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. Okay, it could have been called anything, but they called it the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. So it says the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. They were signed and ratified, passed by the states immediately after the Constitution took effect. They focus heavily on the rights of individuals and especially the rights of people accused of crimes in the new nation. Okay, put yourself historically in their shoes. They've just fought a war to break away from Britain. They passed the Declaration of Independence, which was a long list of complaints they had against Britain. And now they've designed a government, a new government separate from Britain. They want it to be as perfect as possible. They want to make sure every weakness that they identified in the British system, they want to address and make sure that weakness is not there in their system. So these amendments, and the way the whole Constitution is, but certainly the first 10 amendments are saying, okay, we don't want to have the problems that we identified and we fought a war to get out of in Britain. We don't want to have those weaknesses. So they wrote these amendments, laws, basically. Okay. Now, the good thing or bad thing, depending on your perspective on different reasons, is that the amendments are extremely broad. Okay, they didn't go into they couldn't have gone into every single detail, especially as the nation has evolved over the last 2 centuries. Which is why, of course, they designed the court system, the Supreme Court. Okay, but these are pretty darn wide open ideas. So the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment. Respecting means kind of about, not respecting like I respect you, but respecting like about. So Congress shall make no law about an establishment of religion. Okay, there is no national religion officially, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of people to peaceably assemble, or to petition the government for the redress of grievances. So those are First Amendment rights: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. Okay, those are First Amendment rights. Now they're very broad. And of course, there's a million different ways you can view those things as different situations arise, which is why we have the court system to help us kind of interpret what their views were. Okay, the Second Amendment was, you hear about Second Amendment rights. What is the Second Amendment rights today? How can you summarize the Second Amendment?
The right to bear arms.
The right to bear arms. Okay, we as citizens can own and have guns, and of course that ripples out into a lot of different ways, and people have different viewpoints on things. You can have open carry, you can have concealed carry. Some states put limits on what types of guns you can have. Okay, all they say is a single sentence: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, that's all they say. They didn't know what type of guns we would have someday. But of course, it's the court system, and our legislators write laws that help put limits on the right to keep and bear arms. As a citizen, I can go down to Dick's Sporting Goods and buy a gun and hunting and do whatever, but I can't get on Amazon and buy a tank or a rocket launcher, right? There are limits, and those limits move over time as we make laws and change laws, and as the Supreme Court and the court system interprets things differently. But that's the amendment process. They by no means covered every base or got every detail ironed out. And there's, there's people write thousands of books on what this little sentence, what it means, you know. Amendment number 3, this is kind of a different one. Now this is think historically. Why would they have written this? Amendment 3, no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered, put to live in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. What you had back then, now this is not, nobody's talking about their Third Amendment rights today. Nobody, right? So, but back then, during the Revolutionary War, it's being fought like all around you, in your town. One state over, there's battles happening. And so the British soldiers, during the Revolutionary War, Britain viewed the colonies as British. Americans viewed the colonies as American. So they're fighting the war right in your own backyard. At times, there would be a soldier to knock on your door and say, we're soldiers either for the American side or the British side. We're going to take over your house and you need to let us sleep here. Okay. Or, a group of the army would come into your town and say, okay, we're here, 1,000 troops are in your town. You as the town people need to quarter us, house, and sometimes feed us and we'll leave next week. Well, the Americans didn't like that. So and that was a big thing. It must have been a big deal because they wrote the Third Amendment about it. Again, nobody today is talking about the Third Amendment rights, right? Some just doesn't happen. I can't imagine a world where that would matter again. But at the time, it must have been a big deal because they made a big deal about it. So here's an interesting little cartoon I found. This is the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. Each little card is what they're about. Now, there are tons of historical reasons why they wrote these amendments about these things. So we've covered 1, 2, 3. 4 is, protecting citizens from arrests and searches without a warrant. The police just can't come and arrest you for no reason. There has to be a reason. Rights of persons accused of crime. You have a right, and number 5 and number 6, you have a right to go on trial, a trial of your peers. It has to be speedy. It can't, they can't put you in jail and then your trial be 5 years later. Okay. Number 7, jury trials in civil cases. If I'm suing you for money because whatever you harmed me in some way, we get a jury trial. Number 8, limitations on bail and punishments. You can't. It's no. This is where they say no cruel and unusual punishment is the 8th Amendment. Number 9 says any rights not listed in the Bill of Rights can still belong to the people. Like they basically covered their butts and they said, well, we may have not listed all the rights that people have. There may be other rights that we've not listed here. And number 10 says any powers that are not explicitly given to the government belong to the people. So numbers 1 through 8, you can imagine the world that they lived in and how they felt so beat up by the British that they protect themselves from a bunch of things. It's either protection from the British or protection for people on trial accused of a crime. It's interesting to think there must be some pretty big reasons why they wrote those 10 amendments that way. Okay, so that's the Bill of Rights. There's other constitutional amendments. There's 27. The last one was passed in 1992. These are the ones that I think you probably want to know existed. 13th, 14th, and 15th are called the Reconstruction Amendments or the Civil War Amendments. They happened right after the Civil War, which we'll talk about in the future. But of course, what was the Civil War about? Let's just take just a second here. What was the Civil War about in the 1860s?
The war to bring back the southern states into the Union when the southern states seceded from the Union because
Yeah.
of slavery.
Right.
And
Over the issue of slavery.
and it talks a lot about slavery too.
Right. So yes, you have in those colonial days and the early days of America, you have slavery, primarily in the South, though there was some slavery in the northern states. And so they fight the Civil War after 11 southern states seceded from the United States of America. Okay, so we'll talk about the war at some point in the future. But the North wins. They force those 11 states back into, basically just, it's interesting. The Revolutionary War was America, the colonies fighting to break away from Britain, and the colonies won. The Civil War was kind of similar, kind of an echo or a mirror image of the Revolutionary War. The southern states were seceding, trying to break away from the United States because they wanted to keep slavery. They wanted, they wanted some different things, but it is primarily about they wanted to keep slavery. And the North, the United States, won that war, and so they forced the southern states to stay a part of the United States. Shortly after, okay, the North wins, the Union wins, they pass these three, some people call them Civil War amendments, some people call them Reconstruction amendments. Reconstruction, with a capital R, is the period of history after the Civil War. But the 13th ended slavery, abolished slavery. The 14th gives citizenship to all men regardless of race. So first, African Americans are freed as slaves, and then African American men, not the women yet, but the men are given citizenship. And then in the 15th Amendment, it gives the right to vote to all citizens, regardless of race. So, that's some pretty rapid social change in the nation. The period after the Civil War must have been very interesting, very exciting, and probably scary to live through. There's a lot of change happening very quickly. So we'll talk about that down the road. The 18th Amendment prohibits the selling of alcohol for 10 years. Okay, so that's a period we call prohibition because it was prohibited. Then you notice the 21st Amendment repeals undoes the 18th Amendment and ends prohibition. So for about 14 years, about a decade, it was illegal to make, sell, or drink alcohol. Interestingly, alcohol did not go, the consumption of alcohol did not go down during the Prohibition era. People still sold it, people still made it, people still drank it. They just did it illegally. So 1920s up to 1933, you have Prohibition. 22nd Amendment limits the presidential terms to 2. Okay, a president today can only serve 2 4-year terms. That was not always the case. But now they made a 22nd Amendment to actually limit it. 26th Amendment, we all know the U.S. voting age is 18. That, before that, it was kind of up to the states, and different states were a little bit different. And then somebody must have said, that's not a good way to do it. So they passed an amendment. And in the 27th Amendment, this isn't the most important one, but it's the last one they passed in 1992. If the members of Congress vote to raise their own salaries, if they pass a law saying members of Congress will get paid more, it doesn't take effect until after the next election. Okay, which makes a lot of sense, I think. If you and I are Congress and we decide, okay, Congress members need to be paid a little bit more, it doesn't take effect the next day. It takes effect after the next election. So technically, you wouldn't be raising your own pay. You'd be raising the pay of the next members of Congress. And if you happen to be re-elected, then good for you. So that's the last constitutional amendment. Not that important, but it's the last one. Okay. So, and some of those are very short. Some of them are longer and have a lot of details wrapped up to them. Oh, we skipped the 19th Amendment, 1920, 100 years ago today, or not today, but this year, 100 years ago, women got the right to vote in 1920. Okay, so you can see the amendment process was designed in the Constitution. There's a part of the Constitution that says, this is the plan, this is how you amend this. They knew it was an imperfect document. They knew the world was going to change and that changes would have to happen down the road. So you have slaves being freed. You have African Americans becoming citizens. You have everybody getting the right to vote. You have women getting the right to vote. Things, and then there's little changes. Okay, the U.S. citizen or the voting age changes to 18. Some big changes, some little changes. Okay, the constitutional amendment process. You know, let's be kind of quick with this one. It starts in Congress, and then on the left-hand side, and 2/3 of Congress has to propose or pass an amendment. 2/3 vote, and then it goes out to the states. The states have to ratify it, not Congress. An amendment has to happen at the states. It starts in Congress and then the states vote on it. Either every state legislature, like, you know, our representatives in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or they can have a special convention within each state. Either way, a majority, 3/4 of the states need to agree to something for it to become a constitutional amendment. Constitutional amendments are a very big deal. Okay, it's easy to pass a law. It's pretty difficult to pass a constitutional amendment. If something passes as an amendment, it has to be a pretty big deal that everybody in the country cares about. Okay. All right, branches of government. Now these quotes are from the Constitution. So Article 1, if you're taking the GED test or the HiSET test, and you see, you know, they give you a reading passage, and it says Article 3, Section 2. That's probably from the Constitution. Okay, Article 1, Section 1, Article 1, Section 2. There's different sections. Some are long, some are short. But that's how the document is structured. So Article 1, and some people say that it's Article 1 because it's the most important, or the founding fathers who wrote the Constitution viewed the legislative branch as the most important branch of government. Some people say that's why it's Article 1. So Jennifer, could you read Article 1, the little description there?
All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives.
Good. Okay. Thank you. So I think that's the first sentence of Article 1. Legislative powers. To legislate means to make laws. That's where they pass laws. It is a representative government. We elect people who then go and do what we want them to do. And if I vote for somebody, if my town or, you know, my area of Pennsylvania, or let's say Pennsylvania, okay, we have 2 senators. We're going to talk about this in a second. We have 2 senators that represent our whole state. If they go to the United States Senate and they're making decisions that we, the majority of Pennsylvanians, think are dumb decisions, or doing dumb stuff, or doing things we don't agree with, what can we do about it? What's the answer to that? There's actually a couple things. If we elect a senator in Pennsylvania and they go to the Senate and they start doing dumb things, they make decisions you don't agree with, how can we react? Anybody?
By voting them out.
Yeah, next time that person is up for election, you vote for somebody different. Okay, that's the big one. And the senators know that. So their hope is that when they make those decisions every day, they get up in the morning, they go to their meetings, they go to vote on things. Hopefully they're thinking in the back of their minds, how do the people of Pennsylvania want me to vote? I need to keep them happy by voting the way that they want so that I can be reelected. That's generally the way that our representation works. And if they do things that the majority of Pennsylvanians don't agree with, we won't vote for them next time. Okay. Or the other thing that I was thinking of after I said it was, you can send an email, make a phone call, write a letter to your senator and say, hey, I heard about this decision you did. I disagree with it. You know, and people do that all the time. And then those senators, you know, they get hundreds of letters a day, emails, phone calls, phone messages. If enough people call them and say, hey, that was dumb, the thing that you just did last week, then they're going to know that and they're going to change their behavior to hopefully represent the people of Pennsylvania better. So it's a representative democracy. You and I don't get to decide if they're going to pass a law, but we choose the people that are making those decisions. So it's not a perfect system by any means, but you know, the founding fathers would argue it's better than a king making all the decisions and not really caring about what you think. Okay, so that's the legislative branch. So to legislate means to make laws. Article 2 is the executive branch. To execute the laws means to put them into effect. Okay, the military is in the executive branch. Some people would say police powers. The police are an executive. They're not in the executive branch of the federal government, but it's kind of, to execute the laws means to make them happen. So Article 2 says the executive power shall be vested, you know, put in a president of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the vice president, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. And then in Article 2, Section 1, they describe elections and how the elections go. Okay, so they lay out a few specifics there. The executive branch, we're going to talk about that in a second. Article 3 is the judicial branch. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. So there, they put a little power in the hands of Congress and says, okay, we're going to have a judicial branch, but Congress can decide exactly what that judicial branch looks like. At the top is one Supreme Court. Okay, now these pictures on the left-hand side, the top one is the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The middle one is the White House. Now there's two faces of the White House. I think that's the north side of the White House. The south side is rounded. So maybe sometimes when you think of the White House, that's the side you think of. And the bottom is not a building that many people are familiar with, but that's the Supreme Court building. Okay. And you can drive down to Washington, D.C. and walk the streets and see these amazing historical buildings. So the legislative branch. Jessica, could you read this paragraph for us?
At its creation in 1789, the legislative branch was the most innovative. Ruled by kings and emperors was an old style of government, and the legislature in many ways represented the new. Almost certainly, the founders intended Congress to have more important powers than the president and the Supreme Court. However, they placed many checks and balances on the legislature that have prevented absolute power in the hands of one branch. Founders controlled power not only by checks from the other branches, but by creating a bicameral,
Yeah,
is that right?
bicameral. Yeah.
Or two-house Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives.
Okay, thank you. So it says the legislative branch was the most innovative. At the time, there weren't any uh, other governments in the world that looked like this. It was mostly kings and emperors, and people who'd won a war and won power by force. To have a body in a nation's capital of people that were peacefully elected, and when they lose an election, they leave. That's a new thing in 1789. So I think that's kind of neat. They came up with this idea and they made it happen. Different than almost any other country in history up until that point. Okay, so they built it very carefully. The checks and balances we're going to talk about. The bicameral, that's a good social studies word. We have a bicameral, everybody always says a bicameral legislature, 2 houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. They designed that on purpose. The House of Representatives and the Senate, they serve different purposes. They have different jobs, but of course they work together hand in hand. So actually, before we go to that next screen, let's see what you guys may know. So the House of Representatives, how long do those people serve when they're elected to the House of Representatives? How long is a term?
Six or 8 years.
No. The House of Representatives is 2 years. They're elected every 2 years, and every 2 years you have to run for re-election. Okay, the Senate, how long do senators serve for? Anybody know? Senators serve for 6 years. Okay.
Got those mixed up.
Yeah, that's okay. Senators serve for 6 years. You know, every 6 years, that senator is up for re-election. And representatives in the House of Representatives run for re-election every 2 years. How many senators does the United States have today? Well, let me put it this way. How many senators does each state have?
2.
2. Every state has 2. How about the House of Representatives? How's that done?
It's dependent on the number of persons in each state.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So the House of Representatives is representation based on population. Today, California is the most populous state in the nation, and they have, I think, 53 representatives out of a total of, let's jump to that screen, 435 people in the House of Representatives. 53 of them, so almost 1 out of 9, like more than 10%. More than 10% of the House of Representatives is representatives of California. Okay, compare that to Wyoming or South Dakota, which has far fewer people. They have 1 or 2 representatives because it used to, when they wrote the Constitution, they said, okay, a 1 representative for every 100. I don't know, I'm not sure, but let's say every 100,000 people. So if there's 1 million people that live in Pennsylvania, that's 10 representatives. If there's just 100,000 people that live in Rhode Island at the time, that's 1 representative. So Pennsylvania gets 10, Rhode Island gets 1. As the country became more populated, more and more people, more and more citizens being counted, the number of representatives was getting pretty high. So I don't know what year, maybe I should know what year, but kind of early, a long time ago, they reached 435 members in the House of Representatives, and then somebody said, hey, this is a lot of people to be making decisions. So let's stop the number at 435. Okay, but every 10 years there's a census, which we see this year. Every 10 years there's a census, and so we're going to look at, okay, how many people live in Arizona? How many people live in Pennsylvania? Did more people, where is the population moving? Maybe the population this year is the same in Pennsylvania as it was 10 years ago, but in Arizona, they have a lot more people. Well, then some of Pennsylvania's representatives may shift to another state that gained more people. So the numbers of representatives per state can change I think it's every 10 years because of the census. So that shifts and moves, and it's based on population, but it's capped at 435. The Senate has 100, 2 from each state, no matter what. And that comes from the Constitutional Convention as they were arguing things and deciding how to do it. Big states like New York had a lot of people, and they said, no, we need to represent the legislature needs to be one house of Congress and represented by population. And little states like Rhode Island, and I think it was actually Delaware, said, no, if we do it that way, then nobody's ever going to listen to Delaware because we won't have very many representatives. We need to do an equal number from each state. So every state has an equal voice, 2 votes per state. They couldn't decide. People were going back and forth. Every state, depending on if you had a lot of people or few people, every state had different views on things. They finally compromised and said, okay, let's have 2 houses of Congress, one based on representation of population, one, the Senate, having an equal number from each state. And so the Senate and the House of Representatives are built differently, they work differently, they're for different reasons. Okay, the Senate generally is viewed as being slightly more important and having more power. You see on this chart, they confirm presidential appointments. When the president appoints somebody, like a Supreme Court justice dies and we need a new Supreme Court justice, then the president names somebody and the Senate confirms that person. They vote. Sometimes those people don't get chosen. They get rejected. This past winter, we saw an impeachment of the President of the United States, which is a mighty rare thing. He was impeached, and this is exactly how it's meant to work. He was impeached in the House of Representatives, which basically means he was accused of something. Okay, the House of Representatives, if you remember all those months ago, they did impeach him, which does not mean the president was removed from office. It means he was impeached. He was accused of something. The Senate then holds a trial. They become the jury. And it happened over a couple of weeks, and it happened really fast. They held a trial of sorts, and he was impeached in the House of Representatives, but the president was not. They chose to do nothing. They chose to not remove him from office. That's exactly as it was laid out in the Constitution. The House of Representatives and the Senate have different roles. The Senate also approves treaties with different countries. Okay, so they're from the Constitution. These 2 houses have different purposes. Okay, let's stop there. I do like to keep pretty darn close to 1 hour. So we'll stop there with the executive branch. But as you can see on the screen, the executive branch is a lot more than just the president and the vice president. There's thousands and thousands of people that work in the executive branch of the government. And we'll pick up there next week. Okay. Here's what I want you guys to do. Let me put in the chat. Let me find the chat. Oh, here we go. I'm going to put in the chat my email. I would like you to send me an email. Okay. Here, let me see. Okay. There in the chat, if you find the chat on Zoom, is my email, mjmanfred.tiu11 There's my chat. Can everybody see that? Can everybody
Yes,
see?
we can.
Okay. There's my email. Send me an email today. I'd like to have your emails on file. That way, if you have a question, you can answer it. If I want to follow up with you on something, I can send you an email. Send me an email, and I will send you this document that we're looking at, and I'll send you the recording. And I'll just follow up. Maybe this afternoon, maybe tomorrow morning. I'll follow up with each of you. Just make sure you have what you need. The document here is the whole thing. Everything we're going to talk about. Things from today, things that we're going to move on to next week. Okay. I appreciate it. My goal is to make this a 3 or 4 week crash course. But to be honest, we didn't make it as far as I had hoped to today. So maybe it'll be more than 3 or 4 weeks. But this is all good stuff, and I appreciate your input here. Okay. Any questions on, I don't want to go before we answer any questions. Any questions on what we talked about today?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Jennifer, Jessica, any questions?
No.
No.
Okay. Well, super. Send me an email, and then I will send you this document. You can look it over, check out things. I have a couple of links on there to things you can click on. It's always good to, when you learn something, when you hear something for the first time, wait a day or two. I always say, I've done this class on Thursdays. So today's Thursday. Even over the weekend, open up this PowerPoint, or I'll send it to you as a PDF. Open up these slides, look it over. Just by doing that for 5 minutes, it's going to put it deeper in your brain, deeper in your memory. So I like to share that with you when I can. So send me an email today, and I'll make sure we do that. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thanks for logging in. I appreciate it. I look forward to talking with you next week. So have a good weekend, everybody.
You
You too.
also.
All right. Thank you.
All right, have a good day.